from my voice, but I have never seen anything like it.
You believe in miracles? Yes! Unbelievable.
Hey, welcome back to the show. Sunday afternoon edition, Sundays with Zimmel, right? Of the Andrew Zimmel podcast. I'm your host, as always. Look, we are talking to Connor Groel. He is a friend of mine, also a college basketball expert. He did Bracketology all the way starting in February, talking about the teams that we're going to get in, talking about the teams that weren't, and he's an accomplished author. So here he is. I'll let him do all the talking for me. All right, on the phone line right now, we have accomplished author and college basketball expert Connor Groel on the line with us, talking to us a little bit of a preview before Selection Sunday next week. Connor, let's talk about some of the top teams in some of these conferences. We're both fans. We both kind of followed the Big 12 a little bit. And Kansas right now feels like they're the number one team in the AP poll. Are they the number one team coming into the tournament, do you think?
Absolutely. Kansas right now seems like the definitive number one team in the country. For a while, it looked like it had been them and Baylor, another Big 12 team who I also still have as a number one seed, despite them losing a couple games recently. But Kansas really, in my view, has separated themselves as the number one team in the country. And in fact, in all of the metrics used by the selection committee on their team sheets, Kansas ranks number one in the country. So safe to say it would be a pretty big surprise if they didn't end up number one overall.
Which is a pretty big deal. Now, they kind of break up these the brackets a little bit differently. Every year, it kind of feels like there's a couple teams that are head-scratchers in different type of regions. What region do you think Kansas is going to be the number one seed in, along with being the number one overall?
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine the Midwest. They're obviously going to look at the top few teams in the country and try to put them in the region geographically closest aligned to them. So Kansas, in fact, what they're going to do if Kansas ends up being the number one seed is they'll actually send a note out to Kansas and basically say, which region do you want to be in? So they'll have their pick.
So let's talk about some of the mid-major conferences. Gonzaga and Dayton, both those teams look like they're hitting all the right cylinders at the right time. San Diego State's another one. Seton Hall's another one. Out of some of these mid-major teams, Connor, what can we expect? Do we expect one of those teams to get a number one seed in their region as well?
Yeah, I think so. And in fact, if you're a fan of the mid-major teams, this is probably the best chance of any year I can remember of a mid-major team being able to win the whole thing. For me, I have three of those mid-majors you just mentioned, Gonzaga, Dayton, and San Diego State in my top five right now. I have Gonzaga at number 2 overall, right ahead of Baylor. I have Dayton at number 4 and San Diego State at number 5. And for me, that last number 1 spot right now is kind of a toss-up between Dayton and San Diego State. And it was going to San Diego State until they lost their conference tournament championship yesterday to Utah State. And if Dayton wins the A-10 tournament, I think they'll be in position for number 1 seed over San Diego State. But I think all three of these teams, no matter where they end up, are very strong. And then outside of that, you mentioned Seton Hall. I think the Big East, maybe not seen as one of the power conferences by some people just because of the fact that they don't play FBS football. But certainly in a basketball sense, the Big East is a power conference, and the Big East with teams like Villanova and Creighton and Seton Hall, those are all teams to watch out for, all teams that could potentially make a Final Four run as well.
Now, what can we talk about in the Pac-10, or I should say the Pac-12? What teams in the Pac-12 right now are really standing out to you? Because it feels like the Midwest, and you talk about the Big East, both of those conferences, along with the ACC, those all have teams that I think people could see playing in an Elite Eight or a Final Four. But what does the West Coast and the Pac-12 have to offer?
Right. Well, I think for starters, this is a better year for the Pac-12 than it was last year. The last couple years for the Pac-12 have been kind of disastrous. So at least it's been a strong bounce-back season for the conference, despite the fact that they don't have any teams that I think anyone sees as a real national championship contender. I have Oregon as a 4 seed as my top team out of the Pac-12. and then also teams like Arizona, Colorado, and USC safely in the field. And then we have a few more teams, Arizona State, Stanford, and UCLA, that are bubble teams right now. UCLA had been one of the hottest teams in the country over the past month or so. They dropped a game to USC yesterday, and for my money, they probably still need to make a deep run in the conference tournament to get in, mostly because their net ranking is in the 70s, which is really low for a bubble team, despite some of the good wins on their resume. But I have Oregon definitely as the strongest team in that conference. And then if UCLA can find a way to get in, they seem to be playing really well right now.
Yeah, I was going to ask a little bit more about UCLA because they are the team that I'm kind of looking at as a boom or bust team, a team that if they go deep in the Pac-12 tournament, they could get a okay seeding, and then they might make a little bit of a run to a Sweet 16, or they're going to be a team that gets left out entirely. Why is it like a team like that? Why are they so up and down, do you think?
Yeah, it's, this net ranking, this is the second year of the NCAA switching from the RPI to the net as their main sorting tool, as they would say. UCLA today is number 75 in the net, which, again, if you're thinking it's a 68-team field and a lot of those spots on the lower end are taken up by the smaller conferences, 75 is a really low number for a bubble team. They do better in some of the other metrics, like the KPI and the strength of record. They're kind of in the 40s and 50s-ish in those areas. And the main thing that's working in their favor is the fact that they have 6 quadrant 1 victories, which is more than just about all of the other bubble teams. So for UCLA, it's kind of going to be a matter of if the selection committee is going to favor the fact that they have all these strong wins or some of their overall advanced metrics. So that could leave them either inside or outside of the field. And UCLA is kind of one of the tougher teams to call right now. But I agree with you for sure that if they do manage to get into the field, this is a team I don't think anyone's going to want to see.
So a year after Duke is the number one team talked about, I think that they got talked about more than some of the lottery NBA teams, to be completely honest with you. Duke was the number one story for an entire year. This year, I haven't seen a lot of Coach K. I haven't seen a lot of Duke basketball. Has it been that big of a drop-off, or is just college basketball this year kind of in one of those waning years?
I think last year we had a pretty unique situation where we had Duke getting all 3 of the top 3 recruits in R.J. Barrett, Zion Williamson, and Cam Reddish, and all 3 of them, lottery picks in the NBA draft. So they really dominated the entire conversation around the sport last year. And this year, I think the sport is down a little bit as a whole, and, just in terms of numbers and stuff like that, probably because of the fact that there doesn't seem to be one super dominant team or one team that has a lot of, players projected to go highly in the draft. We don't have a Zion Williamson type character or a Trae Young character to kind of lead the storyline for the season. That being said, this Duke team, 25-6 as they end their regular season, I still have them as a 3 seed. Certainly not as strong as some of the Duke teams that we've had in previous years, but still a strong team overall. And if you're thinking that we don't have one standout team, I think maybe Kansas has kind of separated themselves as that standout team. But when there aren't a lot of super good teams, the field is definitely more open than normal, and Duke is still a team that has Final Four potential for me.
Really? Okay, so tell me a little bit more about Oklahoma, a team in the Big 12, a team that they're not in that same category as Kansas, but they've also seemed like one of the more consistent teams, them along with Baylor, for the year. What do we like out of Oklahoma this year?
Well, I think Oklahoma, again, I don't think it can be understated, their experience playing in the Big 12. They have had to fight a lot of these, really tough games against Baylor and Kansas, something that's going to prepare them for the atmosphere of the NCAA tournament. This is a team that struggled a little bit in February. They were starting to, fall into the bubble conversation when earlier on they were a team that was definitely more safely in the field. But I think they're playing a little better as of late. They've won 3 of their last 4, including games against Texas Tech and West Virginia. They lost, again, that buzzer beater shot to Texas, which was unfortunate for them. But they were able to have a big comeback yesterday to beat TCU. And I think that's good momentum for them going into the Big 12 tournament. They get the 3 seed in that tournament, which is good for them. And by winning that game against TCU, I think, there's still a chance that something unforeseen could occur. But I think there's a pretty good chance that Oklahoma now has kind of locked up their bid into the tournament. And I see them kind of fitting into that 9 or 10 seed range. And again, a team that has the tools to be able to pull off an upset. Just a matter of if they will be able to do so.
Kentucky has kind of carried the SEC since, we really got into the 64-team NCAA tournament. Kentucky has always been that team that the SEC can count on to get them in there. Auburn's another team, but outside of those 2 teams, no SEC team in the top 25 outside of Kentucky and Auburn. Do we see the SEC getting just those 2 teams in, or what more can we expect from that conference?
Yeah, I think Kentucky and Auburn are definitely the front runners in this conference. And I think if any team is going to make a deep run in the tournament, almost certainly I think it will be Kentucky. This is a team, of course, every year they have a very young roster. And so they're always a team that gets better over the course of the season. Certainly this is not the team that lost to Evansville in November. But in conference play, they've really been rolling, so I like Kentucky. And again, Auburn is another team safely in the field. Outside of that, I also have LSU and Florida in right now, kind of in that middle of the road 8-9 seed range. There's a couple teams still with potential to sneak in, like a Mississippi State or an Arkansas maybe. But if I'm being perfectly honest with you, a lot of these SEC bubble teams have not really done themselves very well over the last week. Arkansas with a tough loss to A&M. Alabama also lost to A&M, I believe. South Carolina, some of these other teams that were trying to make pushes. It doesn't really feel like they're going to be able to get it done. So right now I'm seeing the 4 of Kentucky, Auburn, LSU, and Florida making it in.
Do you think LSU is looking ahead to the next season when they can get Sharif O'Neal? He'll be on the court, the son of LSU legend Shaquille O'Neal. Do you think that their eyes are really more towards 2021, or do you think that a program is really looking to this year to make a bid for the tournament?
I think certainly they can be looking forward to next season. But, the fact of the matter is the NCAA tournament, the bracket's going to be unveiled in a week, and we expect LSU to be in that tournament. So I think all eyes have to be on having a strong performance in the SEC tournament to getting ready. Because, as we all know, once you get into the NCAA tournament, it's a single elimination deal. And all it takes is, a couple good games, and a team can have one of these more miracle runs deep into the field. So I think for all teams that are kind of in the tournament conversation right now, all eyes towards what can we do to make sure we are as ready as possible for the tournament.
That's a perfect transition to my next question, which would be, what teams are you looking at right now that could be one of those Cinderella story teams?
Yeah. One that really jumps out at me is Virginia. And it's kind of strange to think of Virginia maybe as a Cinderella team, considering they actually won the national championship last season. But this is a team that started out a lot slower. This is a team still in the Ken Palm. They still have the number 1 defense. That's always been, a feather in their cap. But not even in the top 200 in offense per Ken Palm right now. So if you liked the slow, grinded-out Virginia basketball of 45, 44 games, it's kind of like that on steroids this season. But this is a team, again, that started out a lot slower, but has really, really come on strong. They finished just 1 game out of first place in the ACC. Over the last month or so, they've beat all the strong ACC teams in Duke, Florida State, and Louisville. I have them all the way up from a team that was a bubble team maybe a month ago, all the way up to a 6 seed now. So I'm really liking the looks of Virginia. If you want to look about look at some of those other teams that are playing really hot right now. Providence is one that comes to mind. Another team that suffered a bunch of really bad losses in the non-conference, but has really been killing it. I think they've won their last 6 Big East games, and the Big East is arguably the strongest conference this season. So that's another team that, to me, could really do some damage.
That's incredible to think about, that just a year ago, I think everybody would say the ACC was the strongest. The Big East this year, in your opinion, is the strongest conference?
I think so. Now, the Big Ten is going to get the most teams in. I think they're probably going to get 10 teams into the field, which is a ton out of 14. But the Big East also is a conference just with 10 teams that's probably going to get 7 into the field. And three teams towards the top in Seton Hall, Creighton, and Villanova. But then it's just a really, really deep conference. So even some of these teams that are more bubble teams like Xavier and Providence are dangerous. And a Marquette team that, has not been doing very well as of late still has, I believe, the leading scorer in the country in Marcus Howard and one of the best players in the country. So that's another team that can be very dangerous.
Another really good transition. College basketball this year hasn't had that breakout star like R.J. Barrett, Ja Morant, or Zion Williamson. Are there some stars in this tournament this year that you're looking at and saying, like, this is really this is going to be their breakout performance?
I think by this point, most of the college basketball world has kind of honed in on Obi Toppin of Dayton as one of the front runners for Player of the Year. I think playing at a mid-major school like Dayton maybe doesn't get you all of the media attention, all the flash, but I think this guy is certainly one of the greatest players in the country and just amazing to watch. If you haven't seen a Dayton game, try to check him out in the conference tournament before March Madness gets underway. But he's a player. If he can lead, a team like Dayton to a 1 seed and perhaps a Final Four appearance, he could really reach a level of superstardom in this tournament. I already mentioned Marcus Howard of Marquette. There are a couple other guys, Luka Garza of Iowa, Peyton Pritchard of Oregon. There are certainly strong players, even if there's not one a superstar, again, like a Zion, like a Trae Young, that's going to be this kind of consensus National Player of the Year. This season will definitely have a much closer, probably the closest National Player of the Year race that I can remember. But certainly a lot of guys that will have the opportunity, again, in maybe such a crowded field this season, to really establish themselves as the best player in the country during the tournament and lead their team to a big Final Four run.
All right, I'll talk to you again next Sunday after they announce the selection picks. Connor, talk to us a little bit more about your book, though, because I want to make sure the listeners know where they can find it and give them a little bit more information on it.
All right, yeah. So I do have a book out, came out in January. It's called Sports, Technology, and Madness. It can be found on Amazon, either searching, Sports, Technology, and Madness, or my name, Connor Groel. You can also find links to it on my Twitter, just at Connor Groel there, where I have all my other bracketology stuff. As far as the book's concerned, it's really a collection of, some of what I consider to be my best sports writing pieces. It's pretty versatile. I think we have, a bunch of different types of stories. The first section of the book is called Adapt or Die, Technology is Forever Altering Sports. And it's kind of me talking about how I see technology kind of shaping the way that sports are adapting over time and how we might need to change how, kind of the sports world views technology, maybe change some of the rules of sports, and just really be more forward-thinking towards optimizing the sports that we know and love, so they can continue to be more popular in the future. I also have a story about the future of college basketball. I have kind of like a documentary type deal on the Cleveland Browns 2018 season, which was something that I was really fascinated with, how they were trying to pull themselves back from a winless season in 2017, and then a whole bunch of various sports stories. So again, if you really like wide-ranging sports content, a lot of stuff kind of critically thinking about the sports industry and maybe how it got to the point it has been and where it's going in the future, I highly recommend this book. Again, Sports Technology and Madness. Just a lot of fun for me to throw that together.
Thank you again to Connor for coming on the show. I met Connor in internship over the summer in San Antonio, the Alamo City, so we did a lot of fun stuff over there. And watching him grow and getting this book done, it's been a real pleasure to kind of see his success and see him grow. Also, go check him out on Medium. If you are a big reader of sports content online, you need to go look at some of the stuff he's doing. Got to support the brand. This week, we have a lot of big stuff coming up. AL West with our good buddy Brendan Snow, who you might remember him from the old show. We have him come on to talk about his Texas Rangers and also all those other pesky teams out west. So that's going to come up on Monday, so you're going to want to check that out. And then, of course, remember next week, Bracket Sunday, we'll have the Selection Sunday show late Sunday night, early Monday morning for you guys to listen to with Connor again. So go support the brand on Medium. Go check us out. We're everywhere now, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, the iHeartRadio app, all Chaser. It's all of the places that you can find your podcast. If you just look it up, Andrew Zimmel, we're there for you. So thank you for continuing to support the show. I will talk to you on Monday to get a week of sports kicked off the right way.